Announced recently as part of the ongoing BC Vision Steering Committee initiatives that there will be a community-wide study to look here in Battle Creek and particularly look at school districts as well. It's an initiative that is backed by the Kellogg Corporation and W.K. Kellogg Foundation, of course, integral in the BC Vision process. And that study will take place through the courtesy of Dr. David Kirkland, among others. And he joins us this morning, Executive Director of the New York University Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and Transformation of Schools. Dr. Kirkland, good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard.
Thank you for the time today. So let's talk about what it is that your center is focused on doing, if we can understand that a little bit better first.
Let me just articulate it a bit more clearly. I want to begin by, just talking about the crisis of education. Across the nation, we see equity and opportunity gaps. For instance, in reading, fourth grade reading proficiency, the Annie Casey Foundation suggested that Black and Latino students read proficiently on average, less than 20%, compared to roughly 50% of their white counterparts. When you begin to disaggregate that data, students who speak dual languages, their proficiency in reading is somewhere around 7%. Students with disability, the proficiency around reading is around 12%. When we begin to think about, students who live in, lower income situations, it's about 20%. And students who go to school in higher poverty situations, it's just above 20%. We have an educational problem. And the beauty of BC Vision is that it has begun to ask critical questions about how we can close the equity gap in education through rigorous research, through data-informed decisions, through action planning that is collaborative with research organizations like my own. And so what we are conducting in Battle Creek, I think, is a visionary process. It's called a transformation study using an iterative process of community review, sharing, reporting, and visioning to plan a set of end results that would be a community-wide vision and a plan of action to create an excellent, equitable education system that benefits all students in Battle Creek from cradle to career.
So how do you approach these studies then? Do you approach it from the presupposition that there is inequity there and you want to try and figure out how much there is, or are you approaching it from the standpoint that maybe there isn't an inequity, we just need to find out whether or not there is?
Well, I think the data is clear that we have, sets of inequities, across a variety of groups. When we begin to think about disability, when we begin to think about language differences, when we think about income, levels, so students who are identified as lower socioeconomic, they tend to experience school less well. There's also a culture and ethnicity gap when it comes to education. So the data is fairly conclusive when it comes to whether or not there is an equity gap in terms of education across a number of, social identity characteristics. The goal of this study is to help Battle Creek and Battle Creek community, or to participate with Battle Creek and Battle Creek's community, to begin to envision ways that we can innovate education so that all students, regardless of your identity characteristics, so that all students might benefit from our educational systems.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Dr. David Kirkland of the NYU Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and Transformation of Schools, helping with the BC Vision with a study that's to start soon and will continue in just a moment on WBCK. Dr. David Kirkland's on the line with us from NYU, participating in a study of the Battle Creek community and its education system. So you have obviously done well to cite national statistics about inequities. How many of these studies have you participated in?
The Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity has done equity-based studies for over 40 years. There has been, potentially hundreds of studies that we've conducted. I've conducted research in areas in Michigan for at least 20 years.
Okay. So you're in the habit then of recognizing these characteristics in various areas. Does the Institute, the center, participate in recommending to those communities post a report how they might handle the information they receive?
It definitely does. The beautiful thing about the BC Vision study, it's a community-based study. NYU is an ally, an accomplice, a partner, that's part of a much larger community vision. It's part of, other studies. What we intend to do with the BC community is to begin to ask questions, like how can we infuse a equity plan in order to improve education and education outcomes for all students from cradle to career. To me, that's a powerful question of Tags and Battle Creek, because it helps us to begin to imagine not what education is or what it used to be, but what it can be. And so when you begin to, plan a future, based on data, you do something that I believe is transformative. There is an American computer scientist who said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Battle Creek is undergoing a very powerful experiment, and that is inventing a future in education that will be more equitable based on a set of data points, based on community input, based on a unique collaboration between a research university and a community that has decided that it wants an excellent education system for all students.
So as you have seen these studies take place, reports given to communities about various inequities in their education system, what have you seen them do to try and correct that, and have they been successful?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in two ways. I'm going to answer it very personally, and I'm going to answer it less personally.
Okay.
The less personal answer is I have seen, a variety of success stories. And part of what, some school districts begin to do is reevaluate, how we understand, education. For instance, culturally responsive pedagogy, which is creating pedagogy that is responsive to the needs of young people across cultures, across languages, across generations, across socioeconomic statuses. That's been an extremely successful, intervention in education, restorative practices, or what in education we call restorative justice, an idea of, rethinking behavior and discipline practices so that we can keep kids in school as opposed to suspending them. Because we do see a system of disparity play out when it comes to school suspensions, where, Black and Latino students are more likely to be suspended than others, which means that they're more likely to lose class time than other students. So I've seen a variety of interventions that have come out of these studies, things like, equity and, racial equity trainings come out of these studies where, teacher mindset becomes a goal. I've seen, updated codes of conduct where those codes of conduct take into consideration things like implicit bias. And so these studies work, and they work, in extremely, complex ways, in a sense that they begin to unpack, if you will, a set of blinders that we have in education, so that educational systems and situations can take more seriously the young people they have in them. This study to me is personal. I was born and raised in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. Went to school in Lansing, Michigan. Went to college in Lansing, East Lansing, Michigan, Michigan State University. And I remember the reason why I was able to get to Michigan State University. It was because of my teachers. I was an unlikely student. I was homeless. I grew up in Detroit, in a situation that was, extremely unkind. And if you look at the statistics, should have never made it to college based on the momentum that social inequity has. But it was because of visionary educators that I was able to make it to, college and make it through college. And with a type of preparation that allows me today to do this type of work. I believe deeply in education, and I believe deeply in the possibilities of communities and educators working together on behalf of young people to ensure that we have have brighter destinies.
Well, it must break your heart to hear the struggles they're having in Detroit.
I believe that in Detroit, there's going to be a situation where, education is transformed, and the possibilities of creating a system of education that works for all young people, will happen. The thing that, inspires me about Detroit is that people haven't stopped working on, this incredible question about how do we provide education to all of our students.
Dr. David Kirkland is with us for a few more minutes. After this break, we're talking to him from NYU, the Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and Transformation of Schools. They're participating in a study in Battle Creek, so inspired by the BC Vision. A few more minutes with Dr. David Kirkland from NYU's Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and Transformation of Schools. They're working on one aspect for the BC Vision, studying the community and schools. David, your personal reference to your own path alludes to something I was already thinking about, that I presume then some of the inequities with which we deal, to which you refer, are deeply rooted. That is to say, and I've heard educational professionals say this a lot, that in certain schools, in certain areas of the country, we're talking about major distractions to learning because of the situations in which some students find themselves. That is to say, they're hungry, or they have a home life that's very difficult, and thus they are distracted from their learning in that regard.
Right, and we find that schools are sometimes, not as responsive as they can be. We know that poverty is not a learning disability. We know also that, speaking two languages is not a learning disability. And the question for us is, how can we be most responsive? How can we leverage the assets that young people bring into classrooms? We also know that 80% or more of learning has little to do with cognition, that there's that socio-emotional element that, conspires within the creation of learning and in learning environmental communities that we need to get at. And I think that there are places in the Battle Creek area that are doing a better job, like in Lakeview, where they have this complex training model for their teachers that is beginning to look at what those socio-emotional, non-cognitive areas are in ways to respond deeply, to students. We believe that this can happen in Battle Creek, it can happen in Penfield, it can happen in Harper Creek. We believe that it can happen, from Prairie View to Columbia Avenue. It can happen within, the Latino population from Capitol and Dickman. It can happen across the city in each and every neighborhood. And that we don't have to be held hostage, to history, nor do we have to be held hostage to the types of social pathologies that make education across the country difficult.
So even with the struggles that school districts are having, for example, the Battle Creek Public Schools struggles with a declining enrollment problem and too many buildings and things of that nature, even with all of that going on, you're saying districts can be more responsive to learning and helping those who might not be learning as well change that?
Well, I'm saying that districts have an obligation to be more responsive and to help in that. And again, I believe the beautiful thing about Battle Creek is that Battle Creek is engaging community study, and we're doing the study not on the community. We're doing the study with the community in order to create a plan, to resolve, some of the issues that we have in education. Let me just talk just a little quickly about what that plan will include. Right now, we're training a cadre of young people to be researchers, to begin to collect data, think about data, synthesize that data in ways that might help us offer solutions. And when I say us, I'm talking about NYU Metro Center, the Battle Creek Vision and its partners, and the larger Battle Creek community. Help create solutions, within education. Education fails when, it fails to have a plan. Battle Creek is moving toward, the first step toward success, and that is, creating concrete sets of plans that are driven by data.
So are a preponderance of people in Battle Creek going to be meeting those researchers and being asked questions by them?
Oh, we hope so.
How are you going to do that? Door to door, or how does community forums? How does this work?
Well, we've been at, over the past few weeks, we've been at a few events. We've collected participants' names. We've done as much as we can to recruit participants. We'll continue that. We was at the Cereal Fest a couple weeks ago. This weekend we were at the Juneteenth event that was held in Battle Creek. We've canvassed neighborhoods. There will be some door-to-door work. There will be some faith-focused group works and barbershops and faith-based institutions. Some work done within schools. The goal is to recruit widely and broadly. As many community members to this study as we can. The study itself, it's about the people of Battle Creek. It's about us, and it's about what we can do. Not necessarily about what we're not doing, but about what we can do. It's also about, choosing an education pathway, for our young people from cradle to career, to ensure that each student who sits in a seat in our schools will get the best education, that we can give them.
And what is your time frame here? When do you expect to be able to report back to BC Vision on this?
Well, we will report to BC Vision every month. We will give them some, information about the data that we've collected with some preliminary analysis. There is a point of, culmination. We believe late December, early January, we'll have a full report, placed together where, and the action planning teams will take that information and begin to, create, broad plans. We will make recommendations and assist with that planning process.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing the results of that, and you're welcome to update us anytime you want.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. I want to thank the community of Battle Creek for inviting us to do this very, very important work.
Dr. David Kirkland, Executive Director with the NYU Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and Transformation of Schools.